5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Ladies and gents, it is 2022. And this is also episode 22 of the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel. I'm here with my good friend, Dr. William Braybar. We're out here in the Canadian Rockies. And the same way that we were doing this in 2021, we are still trying to find a grand unified theory of the way that your body is supposed to move. The truth in biomechanics, we're looking at some really cool alternate explorations of the human body that kind of contradict some mainstream opinions, go away from the grain of a lot of strength and conditioning literature. And we love the opinions and the ideas that piss people off, generally speaking. We'll be touching on a little bit of beef that we've seen on Instagram amongst a couple of fitness professionals. We're going to talk a little bit about our own goals, our own ideas. We're going to talk about plans for the podcast this year, some of the programs that we want to put out. And let's start with, 2022 is a brand new year. Whether or not you set resolutions, I set a ton of resolutions today, and I haven't set resolutions, New Year's resolutions, since the year 2009, basically. And I'd love to know, Will, do you have any goals or aspirations for the year in terms of your own movement practice or your own exploration of these concepts that we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything mind-blowing specific, right? I want my movement to be cleaner. I want to be more efficient, more proficient. We're talking in terms of running. Definitely, I love striking, so anything MMA and boxing. I want to learn daily and increase that. So basically be more smooth with my movement and be more efficient.
Would you say you kind of have like a Kaizen philosophy about that? Like, for those who aren't listening, Kaizen, or who don't know who are listening, Kaizen is the principle that you're like a little bit better every day. It doesn't really, you don't necessarily have like a specified end goal. The goal is just better than the day before kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, the 1% every day thing definitely applies, but yeah, I feel like I have a base with GOTA now, okay? A way to really see where I'm at and build upon that. So, the checklist we went through a million times, I'm not going to go over it, but basically be better in the GOTA principles, use my hips, be back chain dominant, and then expand from there. So I want to get a lot better at dance. I want to get a lot better at striking. And I feel like the platform is there to build off of.
Which I think is very, very cool. I love, for those who are just listening for some reason to the 22nd episode as the first episode that you're listening to, we spent many episodes talking about biomechanics. We discussed GOTA a lot, GOTA standing for the greatest of all time athletes, as sort of like a foundational principle for how the human body is designed to move. Like, it's sort of if you're using it as a North Star or a reference point for proper biomechanics, it's the way that human beings are supposed to walk and run. It looks at the gait pattern specifically for the most efficient movement that doesn't damage your connective tissue over time. And it's really, it contradicts a lot of sort of kinesiology science or sport medicine science that talks about, foot pronation and different things. It has a very different look, and it kind of takes a linear model of movement and turns it into more of a spiraling model of movement. And if you want to learn more about that, go check out the GOTA accounts on Instagram, or listen to some of the podcasts that they do, or listen to our other 21 episodes where we're talking about the different mechanics in depth. Because while GOTA does a really big, cool, overarching principle, we go really deep into the reasons why we see them kind of coming up with these ideas. So, likewise, I think like a lot of my goals around fitness are to kind of recreate some of my old goals around fitness in the lens of these principles that we've talked about, where before, I've like some fat loss goals. I, just had a shoulder surgery just before the new year on December 23rd. And my, my goal is really to rehab my shoulder. That's like my first and foremost. I want to have full function, range, strength. And when I think about how I'm going to be using my shoulder when it's recovered, my sprint mechanics are something that I really want to dial in. Like, I want to be a really good sprinter this year. And I want, before I used to have powerlifting style aspirations where I wanted to be really good at, like have really heavy squats, keep my squat at around 450 pounds. And, that was like, I won't say it was easy for me, but it was natural for me with, with my training history and everything. And I'd like to stop putting that much axial load on my spine and start, dialing my sprint mechanics. So, some of the things that I'm using as my reference point are a few gymnastic skills, mostly like hanging gymnastic skills, so that I have a, like a rough approximation of just how durable my shoulder is in those positions in terms of supporting my body weight. And I also just find gymnastics kind of fun. It's not necessarily, from a biomechanics perspective, it's not optimal. And we've talked about why on previous episodes. For me, it's just fun. I just enjoy that style of training. And so when I'm doing that stuff, however, I'm going to be thinking about, like for example, doing pull-ups. I think about doing pull-ups on the rings where I can actually practice a bow and corner mechanic in the pull, right? I can go from that external to internal and vice versa with the push, right? I can practice those bowing and cornering mechanics through my shoulders and through my scapula and everything, and add some spiral dynamics into some of my upper body training. That's something that I want to kind of explore.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your surgery. So what kind of surgery did you have? What were the expectations? Where are you at now, and how have you been rehabbing it?
Yeah, so I injured my shoulder in 2020 doing a snatch in a CrossFit workout. It was a power snatch. I was very fatigued. I was kind of almost in an overtrained state because I was training, probably 90 minutes a day, 6 days a week. And my shoulder was exhausted, and I just, on the turnaround of the movement, something caught and I tore my shoulder labrum. I took a bunch of MRIs, and they thought that it was a SLAP 4 tear, which is the shoulder labrum tearing into the bicep tendon. And that's what the MRI showed. And so I had a surgeon in Banff named Dr. Butchko. He went in and he did an arthroscopic surgery. When he did it, he said, hey, like we thought we were going to have to do a bicep tendinosis, which is where they detach the bicep and reattach it lower on the bone. But he said the bicep tendon seemed fine. The MRI was showing something false, basically. It was like, it's very common for the MRI to not be fully accurate. So when we were in there and actually looking at your actual tissues, it was like we realized we could just clean up your labrum. So he patched up my labrum, and he also found an impingement in some of my subscapularis and just basically shaved a little bit of that down so that I didn't have that impingement basically permanently kind of making my shoulder.
The bone, or
I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I was, the other thing is when he was telling me all of this, I was still very, very high on the the drugs from going under, right? So they put me under for that operation. I had the option to just, be nerve blocked and stay awake, but I didn't really want to. I love the, you're asleep and then you're awake and the procedure's done kind of thing.
So let's go through, let's say right after the surgery, what was the advice, and have you followed the advice, or have you accelerated, and what are the timelines that you were looking at there?
So I'm the type of person who is really stubborn, and I don't trust doctors as much when it comes to my body. And the reason that I don't is because a lot of the medical advice I've been given, I've been able to ignore, and I do it better myself. And so their advice from the outset was like, hey, don't move this at all because it's going to hurt like hell. It's going to, you still want to be able to, you want to move your hand. You want to, when it's tolerable, take your arm out of the sling and stretch out your elbow, do some pendulum. So let your arm hang and move your body, and the shoulder will rotate in the socket a little bit, but you don't want to do it actively. You're using the momentum from your body. And then we're saying it's try to keep it as immobilized as possible, and then let it hang a little bit and stretch out your arm, do hand pulses and stuff. You'll probably have to do that for a week or two, right? At least a few weeks. I was given Oxycontin for pain, and I was going in and I was thinking, it's okay, well, I've had really bad shoulder injuries. I've had really bad injuries in general before, and for me, I just move until it feels better. I couldn't do that this time, right at the get-go, and it was jarring for me because I have had really bad injuries before in lifting. I've had back injuries and little slips and just things that really hurt. I've had really bad injuries before, and I've been able to deal with the pain pretty easily and know how to stay out of the range. This one was so sensitive and so bruised and so inflamed that like I didn't really have the option to move it too much for the first 3 days. I'd say I was barely sleeping. You know, I was sick from taking pain medications. Like it was a really rough 3 days.
And I mean, 3 days is to be expected, right? Like that's not a lot of time, and that's really from, you know, chiropractic. I see people come out of surgery and you know, get acute injuries. It's 24 to 72 hours is the window of max inflammation, and a lot of times it is better not to touch it. You want to move it in pain-free range, but if you don't have that, then let it be for until the major inflammation goes away.
Yeah, and that's what you know, for me, like my approach has always been like I'll move it as much as I can without it hurting, and that's usually how I've fixed injuries in the past. And this was one of those things where I didn't have a pain-free range at all. I was just in pain, like full stop. Like if I moved it, if I shrugged my shoulders at all, I was like, that was it. So what I was doing was, you know, because I was in my sling and I couldn't take it out of the sling really. Like it was really hard for me to get in and out of a new shirt. Like it was a struggle the first few days. But then as soon as I could shrug my shoulder without pain, I started doing small circles with my shoulder.
Yes.
And then if I could do that for as many pain-free reps, I would do it as, you know, the smallest circles that I could without feeling like it was pulling. And then I would do like a bunch of shrugs, scapular retractions and protractions. I would basically move it like that as much as I could. And then finally, when I could let my arm hang out of the sling without it, you know, feeling like my arm was going to get pulled out of my shoulder socket, basically, I started doing those pendulums. And basically as soon as I had any pain-free range, I started moving it within that pain-free range for as many reps as I could until it got tired or until it started to feel like I was, you know, basically inflaming it too much by having that blood flow in that area. And I mean, like throughout this podcast, I'm going to be doing a lot of the shoulder circles and a lot of the rotations and stuff, because I'm still, you know, the fact that I have, you know, abduction in my shoulder now. Like when I started, I couldn't even like lift it, like my arm an inch away from my body. It was, you know, it was excruciating. And like, I can bring my hand today. I shaved my head with, you know, with my hand razor, my head razor. And I was able to use my right hand to get the other side, right? Like it's
so a couple things come to mind there. What you're saying, it's great. A lot of times, I believe that rehab is way too complicated. If you're coming back from an injury, you just start moving the areas that can move in their pain-free range of motion, and doing that all day is much better. And you got to know which pain-free ranges of motion, right? And obviously, you know much more than the average person. So I'm not saying that everyone just go and do their own rehab. What I'm saying is you have a better understanding than, you know, 99% of people out there on how to move the body. So just start moving it and in its pain-free range of motion, right? So that's great that you started doing that. I also understand the surgeon's perspective where they see people and, you know, if they give advice for people to start moving their body too early, eventually someone's going to get hurt, right? Because they just see so many people and they don't have control over what they do right afterwards. So the advice is usually a little bit generic. Don't move it for 2 weeks. However, when I see somebody and I can see that they have movement, I go for it right away. And then I get them to put their sling on when they need protection, you know, walking down the street or doing something like that, right? So how far ahead of schedule are you? And what did they say? You're 2 weeks out, I believe. Where did they say you would be, and where are you right now? Like what can you do functionally?
Right. So I was recommended to keep my, and it was funny, I was going to ask your opinion on this. I was supposed to wear my sling for 4 weeks, right? I was supposed to be in the sling for 4 weeks and take it off just to do rehabilitation movement. And basically after 8 days, I took my sling off because it was like, wow, I can move, I can hold things. You know, like I wanted to start helping around the house. My partner was like washing all the dishes and doing everything. And I was like, man, I feel like a piece of shit for not helping around the house. So as soon as I had some movement, I took my sling off. I started doing some stuff around the house. But she expressed some concern. She was like, hey, do you think that taking your sling off, maybe they wanted you to have it on there, not necessarily to protect you, but to set your shoulder in a certain way. And maybe like having it out of the sling is going to make it heal improperly. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I was like, maybe, but what would your... You don't necessarily think so, eh?
No, it's like, I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's the opposite. For the first few days, if you have a structure that actually needs to be held in place, like the labrum, let's say it's physically healing, then yeah, there's a certain amount of time you want it in there, right? But in terms of the bone sitting in the proper spot, you want to keep it moving all the time, right? Like in its pain-free range of motion. The sling could be used to shut off your muscles. If you're feeling tired from the day and you don't feel like you have control of the shoulder anymore, you can put it in a sling, and it's like being in a cast for a little bit. Your muscles can shut down, they can relax, and your shoulder can do its thing. But I definitely wouldn't recommend it all day, right? So there's a happy balance there depending on how you're feeling. Your body will tell you after a few days what's what, right? So yeah, and after a surgery, I recommend going with the surgeon's advice. However, in your case, you are way ahead of the curve in, body awareness. That's the biggest thing with these things, right? Like, are you already hyper aware of your body and where everything is? I think you are. So you're ready to explore what you can actually do.
And that's, so you were asking like, what was I supposed to be able to do, and what can I actually do, right? So, for the first 2 weeks, I'm looking. I actually have the whole physical physiotherapy replay plan here. For the first 2 weeks, it was supposed to be a lot of neck mobility, so twisting your neck, pumping your hands within the sling, and then as soon as you can, that passive range of motion pendulum where your arm stays and does some circles. Standing passive shoulder elevation, so putting my hands on a desk and stretching to 120 degrees. Supine passive shoulder elevation with clasped hands. So laying on the ground, holding my post-operative hand and bringing it up as high as I can from the ground. Shoulder shrug, scapular retraction. That was it. It's like you can maybe go on an elliptical or a bike. And that's...
You got that straight from the surgeon?
Yes.
Yeah, so like that's good stuff. If someone's gonna not go to a next level professional, I would say, who can really show you nuance, that's great stuff to do on your own, right? Like to follow that and to get pretty good safe gains, I would do that. But if you really want to rehab and bring your shoulder back to next level, you would want to get a little bit more nuance than that.
Totally
pretty quick.
And then and so like after 2 weeks, there's a lot more nuance there, but a lot of it, like for example, like flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, external and internal rotation, these are all things that they want you to be doing isometrically, right? So they're isometric movements. You'd push your arm against a wall. I can actually do pain-free internal, external rotation. My internal rotation is way more limited. Like if I kind of reach around, I usually like, it's funny because putting my pants on is the hardest thing for me to do, because I'll reach behind me to grab my waistband and pull it up over my butt. And that internal rotation of trying to grab my waistband behind my back, that really hurts. If I forget that I'm recovering, because I feel so good sometimes, I forget that I'm recovering. I'll go and I'll reach behind me, and that really hurts. There's a lot more scapular stability. So there's like straight arm scapular spreads along a wall. It's very similar to a gymnastics movement that I used to do for scapular stability. And then just a little bit of a range of motion. So they want you to, I think the coolest one that I found really interesting is a pulley. So you take like I don't know, it'd be like a belt or something, and you fold it over the top of the door. And you use one hand, pull the other hand up, and you're just trying to get that range of motion, up and down. And that's been a kind of an interesting movement to explore. The fact that I can bring my hand over my head, and my elbow just slightly above my shoulder now. I can't, stick my arm straight up, but the fact that I can bring my hand to my head, and that's pain-free, Nice. I can externally rotate and level my elbow at my shoulder. That's pain-free. I can even almost internally, when I start internally rotating, it starts hurting right about there, which is, it's not quite leveling my hand and everything and having that equal position. But, I have pretty good, I can reach over and touch my other shoulder pain-free. So a little bit of crossover on different parts of my body. If I need to reach over and grab something, I can pick things up as long as they're proximal to my body. So I can't like reach out and grab something. I can do that with my other hand, but if something's close to me, like a coffee cup, for example, I can pick that up. There's no pain, right? I can bring the cup to my mouth, and even bringing the cup to my mouth, for example, that's so. And this is because I've been exploring those pain-free ranges as much as I can. From a physiological perspective, when you're recovering, what do you think? Why do you think movement works better than, for recovery? Is it that there's more blood flow and nutrients getting to the area, kind of thing?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Your joints work with synovial fluid and blood flow, but synovial fluid, where they're encased in a capsule. The lining of that capsule secretes fluid inside the joint, which lubricates it and gives it nutrients. Okay, so that's done with a pump motion, an actual movement. And it really is like you have to move it in full range of motion to get the whole joint to pump that synovial fluid. You don't use ranges, you lose them, right? In your case, I don't know exactly how they did the labrum, but they probably sewed it up. It's a little bit, the muscles were cut. It's a little bit tighter than it has to be. So here's the thing, like an overarching principle to say is that I always get people to go to their pain range, back off 10%, and play within that range. Within that 10% before pain, that is the easiest, lowest hanging advice I can give, which, that's literally what I do. I find pain-free ranges of motion, and we do like FRC principles, functional range conditioning, where you move your joints very specifically right before pain. Okay, so if you got pain, you're saying reaching back into extension, I would be reaching back there right before pain and making sure that, like, just watching you do it, can you do it with a shoulder shrugged? Can you do it with your shoulder down? Can you turn your humerus another half inch towards the internal without pain? Then do it. And then try to go even more extended with your whole hand. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're playing within that pain-free range of motion, and your body will eventually give you that range of motion. It's just a matter of time. Okay. So, but you have to stay within pain-free range. And in certain cases where it's more nervous system related, your body will literally start to shake. When that happens, that could be a good thing if you're, doing it for an exercise and coding it in. But when it comes to actual, after an injury, you want to only do that a little bit to tax that nervous system a little bit. Okay. I would say a little bit and more often versus a lot at once. So when you're rehabbing, you want to do small movements all day, again, within that 10% pain-free range of motion, and do it many, many, many times versus one hard session, which a lot of people are used to doing with their exercise.
Yeah. And that, like even the physiotherapy recommendations in this program, it was, they have basically, it's like single sets, and you're kind of doing higher repetition kind of. It's good recommendations, actually. I was expecting to be like, again, just the default skepticism. I wasn't expecting to be impressed, but it was like, they want you to do it 3 times a day kind of thing. And most of the sessions don't take a ton of time because you're just exploring. It's a little bit of time to explore certain ranges, and then you go on to the next thing. So that's been amazing. That's been really cool.
Just one more note on the next level, like if you really, really hone in on this, you want to see where you're at all times. Like you were asking about, should I wear the sling? If your shoulder feels tired, put that sling on and let it rest, and that, like, let those muscles shut down for a bit, right? So you really have to be in tune with what your body's telling you. Not a lot of people have that, especially after surgery, but in general, not a lot of people have that awareness of their joints to, like, really, have that mind joint connection. Of what exactly are you feeling there? Are you feeling tension? Are you feeling pain? Are you feeling the muscles tighten? All that requires slightly different inputs. So on the next level of it, you really have to listen to your body. And you can take that with a grain of salt, because we can get into that for a whole episode, right? But listen to your body, really actually meditate on it for 5 minutes and see how you feel.
And that's, I think a lot of people don't spend time to do that. Again, the most time that people spend in their bodies is when they're experiencing some sort of external stimulus. And I know that was true for me for a long time, where it was, I'd feel my body when I was training, and then the rest of the day I was a floating head, right? Like I was kind of living in my head, in my other senses, and I wasn't kind of necessarily aware of those internal sensations on my body. When we talked about the paradigm shift of training for an hour every day versus having an ongoing movement practice, we have an episode on that. I think it's that was actually one of our more popular episodes. That was episode 19, a couple episodes ago. It's a training versus a practice paradigm, and the practice ends up being, you're just constantly aware of your body and what it's doing in space and how it's feeling in space. And it's that for me, I've done a lot of that. It's funny. It's a weird thing to say that I love injuries, because I don't. I fucking hate them. Like they're annoying and inconvenient. But I do appreciate the insights about my body that an injury can give me, because you have to be so hyper aware of what your body is doing in space and how it feels internally and how much you have to pay attention to it. It has this this introspective quality that you don't necessarily have unless you're obsessive about your movement practice. But I've learned more about my shoulder joint from it not having the function that it has than I did when I was looking at anatomical diagrams of it, kind of thing. So it's been a great learning experience so far.
Absolutely. Experience is really king on that one, right? Like part of what I think makes me an effective practitioner or chiropractor is the fact that I was injured so much as a kid. Like I literally had kid being, like in my teens and 20s, I had every injury under the book. So I have experience. When someone comes in, it's like, oh, I felt that one before. I kind of know the nuances of it, how it heals, what not to do, what to do. Combined with the anatomical knowledge, it really comes together, and you can really hone in on the nuances of a particular injury. But really, the mind connection to that area, and this goes in general, like having a practice where you actually go in and feel each part of your body is immensely valuable. You need to be able to feel what's going on. A lot of people carry tension literally 24/7 in certain parts of their body because they're, shrugging that area. Let's say the shoulders.
Yeah.
Tons of people just put their tension there, and that's that. I chew with my jaw, like I clench my teeth. Now I'm hyper aware of this, and I still catch myself doing it. Right? I could imagine just in high school and in my early 20s, I was probably clenching 15 hours a day and not knowing it. And I see a lot of people doing it. I can visually see, because I have that feel. I'm like, oh, that person's clenching their jaw and they're unaware of it, right? So yeah, getting into your body and doing that may be more valuable than actually weightlifting. Controversial opinion. Like you could take a month and introspect in your body. I feel like yoga does this one of the best of any system. Yoga
that was the number one. Like I did yoga like very, very seriously. I did yogasana for like maybe a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, like where I didn't lift weights at all either. But I was very, very, committed to doing yoga. And like, ironically, I had more injuries doing yoga than I had weightlifting. That's another topic altogether. But the number one benefit that I had, especially because there was such a deep emphasis on the breath being linked to the movement and the stretch and everything, my introspective awareness of my body was the best that it ever had been. And that's not just in terms of like muscles and tension and everything. Like if something was even slightly off with my nutrition or my sleep, or like I was so hyper aware of every inefficiency that was happening in my physical system, and I felt more empowered to address it and change it because I had that internal awareness. And there was an interesting side effect to that too. I felt like it kind of gave me a bigger emotional awareness, because sometimes when there's something off with your physical system, your emotions and your mood can be really impacted, and you don't necessarily know that it's a physiological issue. And you just are moody and you look for problems outside of yourself, basically, and you blame the world for just something that's maybe you didn't get enough sleep or you didn't eat enough that day and you're fucking crabby, but the world seems like it's ending, kind of thing. I was really able to catch myself in those moments.
There's a lot to that, right? There can be a neurosis that builds up with being extremely hyper aware of your body, right? That's on one end of the spectrum, right? If you're really into it, it's just like, oh, I'm focusing way too much on this. I should be able to chill and have like a, a radar system for where I'm at, right? So there's a little bit of both there. Within yoga, I've never really had major experience with it. I've noticed from my experience in clinic with yoga practitioners coming in to get their pain worked on, I noticed that they, like, if I can get them to hone in on an area, let's say their low back hurts, they're really good at using their breath to relax the area. But a lot of times their pain is coming because of, let's say, not enough stability in their body because their fascial system is too disconnected. That is my personal opinion on that, right? Yeah, it's like your body has to stabilize with its muscular core, like the muscles close to the spine, versus having that, tensegrity structure, or how do you say it again?
It's tensegrity
structure, like Naudi Aguilar talks about, like having that connection that holds joints together, that holds your body together, that makes you super efficient. That can be missing with somebody who lengthens their body too much. Now that awareness in itself is a thing, right? Like right now, I feel like my tensegrity is really on point. That makes me I feel a better proprioception of my body because I have those early warning systems for when I'm moving in improper ways in my joints, right? So there's actually a physiological aspect to that as well. Like the actual sensory structures within the fascia are telling me where my body is in space. That may be missing with somebody who has longer fascia, who's stretched it out. And so your muscles have to work harder. But my point before was that yoga practitioners really know, using their breath and using their focus, how to hone in on a part when I'm working on them. That is the major advantage there.
Yeah, there's that level of innervation in different parts of their bodies, because again, they focus on it. There's this really cool Instagram account called Fascia Training Academy, and they had a post that had a really good definition of tensegrity for those who are like, what the hell are they talking about? Tensegrity is an architectural model that allows you to create stable but adaptable structures using a highly refined balance of tension and compression. So tensegrity is actually it's an architect term that, like, if you think about a building that is too stiff, like a really tall building that's too stiff, if it like experiences a lot of wind in the high altitudes and that model doesn't have enough give, like a lot of buildings, people don't realize this, a lot of buildings that are super tall will actually sway in the wind quite a bit. And if the structure is too stiff, it will break, right? Like the whole building will fall over.
If you see this in nature with a tree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's the bend don't break principle.
Well, that's exactly why I'm a proponent of the spinal engine. It's because that sway is allowing that tensegrity to work properly. Otherwise, you're going to be stiff and very inefficient. However, you can use power to get through that, which is the training model now. Build giant engines on, powerful athletes that are already outlier amazing at what they do. And then the tissue will take care, the movement will take care of itself. I don't believe this is the case. However, I mean, that's a topic for a different episode, perhaps, right?
Yeah, well, we've been talking about that a lot, and I think one of the directions that I'm really hoping our podcast goes is how we can apply both different things. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot since we started our podcast is how can we apply, a lot of the good, because I spent so much time studying strength and conditioning. And a lot of the models for force output and power and everything are really good, like in terms of tissue adaptation, progressive overload, all that stuff. And I've mentioned it before. I love the GOTA principles, and I think it's very, very new in terms of its application to athletic training, right? And I don't think it has to be one or the other, where you either focus on biomechanically sound patterns or you focus on force production and strength development. I'm really curious to see where like what can the two learn from one another, and that's what I'd love to spend a little bit more time discussing.
Well, just a point to that, our last episodes, with ATG and Keegan Smith with short range and long range principles, that's probably the best thing I got from getting into ATG, is really like how they parse out short range movements, which are more, muscular focused, pump blood in there and less damage, versus long range, which, pull on, for simplicity, I think they say tendon, but really it's pulling on the whole system, fascia.
You just say connective tissue.
Yeah, connective tissue, right? So that requires more force, longer range, and more time for recovery. Now, that to me is a way better way to parse out the lifting for athletes versus just heavy all the time. And then, lift heavy, get power here in the gym, and then we'll go to the field and then you learn your sport on the field. Okay. So like, I think ATG is doing a very good job with how they're parsing out long range, short range. I think it is a better way to parse out. It's more simple. Okay. So I think that's the best thing I got from that so far.
Yeah. And I mean, like what I want to start exploring is, how do you apply those principles to, say, a spiral pattern? Like if you're looking at the spiral pattern, like, can you train all the parts of the chain that are involved in the spiral pattern to produce more force? Can you improve the elasticity of, say, like if you're loading the bow, right? The bow of your leg, which is your IT band, we'll say, for example, right? Like the IT band is it's obviously more than that, right? Like, but I'm just saying, like, can you condition that bow, that side? Can you increase the tendonal strength and the durability of it? Can you improve the reality is there is still muscle action going on, right? Very minimal when you're thinking about a sprint or something in locomotion compared to like transference of energy. But can you train that force output in the spiral pattern?
Well, let's parse that out, because yes, you're always training, no matter what you're doing. If you're sitting all day, you're training. You're just training it to your tissue to be lazy, right? So you are training when you're training in a spiral pattern like Goda does. In the bow, if you train in the bow versus, let's say, a lunge, you are training that tissue to be good in the bow. And if Goda is correct, if there is a spiral pattern, which I'm willing to bet there is, in your body, then you should train the tissue that way ultimately. I don't see it making sense to train all these long ranges. Well, I shouldn't say that, right? I see it more advantageous to train the actual spiral motion and the perfections of that versus just training tissue to be long for the sake of being long. Okay. Now you can do both, but the amount that it takes to retrain a person to have that next level movement, to have a bow, to understand how to bow in corner, to have the ranges to do so, to have that inside ankle bone high, it takes way longer than people think. Okay. This is behavior change. And I would put that as a priority before the range work, because from what I'm seeing from ATG and all that is they're not incorporating spinal engine. They're not incorporating the, mechanics of, let's say, the inside ankle bone high. I haven't seen them talk about something as simple as back chain dominance, right? So, and that's such a much more simple way to parse things out than just going long range on your movements. Okay. Not to say you can't do both, but the complexities of the bow in corner, and to me, that's a massive priority to have those down pat in your movement. It takes way longer than you think. And for athletes, my argument would be that is much more important. You can get an athlete much more efficient with much less energy, much less muscle force, doing the principles of Goda versus ATG. And that's a controversial topic at the moment, because I'd say most people are favoring, like, in popularity, ATG is obviously getting out there a little bit more, and it is better than what I've seen from most lifting or any lifting modality in terms of specificity. But I think Goda and, principles of Weck method and functional patterns, a lot of those movement-based biomechanics need to be there first. Now, there's also a camp that I found super interesting, and that's the emergence of neurodevelopment, using your brain and like training your brain to be better at movement. From what I'm seeing visually, there's a lot of it could be applied. Okay. And I don't know a lot about this, but from what I'm seeing, the practitioners, I don't see them actually have good movement. I see them dictating, like the IKN guy, I'm just going to say, right? Like when I watch the go to practitioners move, it's beautiful. Okay. Like the high level go to guys like go to Bam and, Ricky Stanzi and, people that they train and, Coach Carly that I see on Instagram, that Reset 369 guy, they all have impeccable movement. And I just see like, obviously I want that movement. It looks clean as can be. And you can apply it in many different aspects. Where the guys that are preaching the neuroscience stuff, I don't see any good movement from them. So it's a theory that may have some merit, but for me, I want to see where it would apply in actuality. Where are your good movers? So, because to me, the reality is what's in front of you, not papers. Papers can show you a model or give you more good information to go with, but ultimately, what is your movement looking like and how can you reverse engineer it? Which is what I was going to ask you before. Like you said you wanted to learn how to sprint or start sprinting more. If you were to ask a question, what is the best way for me to learn sprinting or to improve my sprinting? What would you say?
That's an interesting question, because like the way that I'm approaching it, or I'm planning to approach it, right, is to improve my bow and corner dynamics, is to take a lot of slow motion video of myself and see, do I maintain ankle integrity in terms of keeping my inside ankle bone high? Do I maintain my spiral dynamic when I'm trying to, run? Because, my go-to pattern for a long time was that rigid spine and, throwing my arms up and trying and focusing on force production, right? And so, can I corner into can I bow into my hip and my leg a little bit more and focus on that bounce out a little bit more? So it's interesting, because the way that I'm planning on doing it is seeing how much integrity and mindfulness of the movement I can maintain until it just becomes second nature, right? So for me, it's like, can I improve my bow in my corner? Can I dip into that bow a little bit deeper and explode out of it? When I'm going, like, what speed do I start losing my inside ankle bone high? And that was something that I was doing a lot on a treadmill. I would record myself, and then I would mark the time that my foot would start pronating and my ankle bone would collapse. And then from there, I'd be like, okay, this is my current level. I'm obviously losing it at speed. I'm going to have to improve my ankle integrity. And then I would, I'd train my inside ankle bone high a little bit more. I would do, more foot and ankle work, foot control work. I would practice foot control on the bow and the corner. So, keeping that inside. And, I'm not a go-to certified coach by any stretch of the imagination. I've always looked at principles and ideas and then applied my own training experiments to them. Right. So I'm not necessarily working with a go-to coach, but the way that I would train working on my sprint mechanics is to try and keep my inside ankle bone high and to see where I start like, so I have the principles, I identify where I lose integrity with the principles, and then I kind of will train from there.
So that's great stuff, right? Like what I was getting at was a little bit more simple. It's like, if you want to improve something and you actually didn't have any other advice, all you have is your phone and you could literally film yourself and reverse engineer good movement. Okay. So you can watch some of the best sprinters in the world, see what commonalities you have with them, then reverse engineer what you're doing wrong and do it correctly. That is literally what GOAT is doing. They're watching the best movers and saying, this is how the best movers are doing it. Maybe, and after, 10,000 reps of watching something, you're allowed to see patterns. It's like, it doesn't have to be in a paper. If you see 10,000 patterns over and over again, use your intuition, right? Like, you don't need a paper to tell you that is the way to do things. If you see it over and over again in the best movers. Now, of course, there's going to be arguments to that, but I would say the best way to improve your sprint is to reverse engineer good sprinting mechanics from both yourself, filming yourself, and analyzing good movers, okay, and good sprinters. And that's how I would learn any activity. That's how I learned striking. I take, if anyone subscribes to dynamic striking on I get targeted with every ad possible because they know I buy all the products. But basically, all the best strikers in the world put their libraries together and teach you how they do their tricks, how they box, how they, do MMA tricks and kicks and whatnot. To learn it, I watch what they're doing and then I put it in slow motion. Then I watch myself do it and put it in slow motion and then compare. And then it just gets better and better and better. And I think that's the best way to learn, if you can actually pull that off.
That's how I learned lifting too. Like even deadlifts and squats and the Olympic lifts, like I didn't have a coach to teach me that shit. Like I didn't, when I was learning them, I was a broke student, right? And I didn't have the opportunity to really go in. So I would watch these power lifters and I would listen for the cues that certain coaches would be saying around me. And I would observe the movement pattern and I would visualize how that would feel in my body. And then I would practice it. I would film myself for feedback. And, even lifting, which are these very fundamental, well, I wouldn't say they're fundamental, but they're very basic patterns. That's how I learned how to lift, right? I would watch film and then I would film myself and then I would compare and contrast and I would make adjustments. And, you do that over and over and over again. That's how I learned how to dance well, I wouldn't say I learned how to dance. I'm not a great dancer, but I learned certain dance moves, doing the exact same thing, right? It's the visual feedback. And like you said, the reality is what's in front of you. It's not what you write about on paper. You can make observations and you can write it on paper and you can write a map. And I wrote a quote actually today. I'm working on a book. And one of the things that I wrote in my rough draft for one of my chapters is that the map is not the territory, right? So the things, the observations and speculations that you make, or the ideas about something, are not the thing itself, right? Like ideas can point to a reality, but they can't be the reality itself. So if you have ideas about something and you're speculating about something, the speculations are one thing. The actual thing is, separate from your ideas about it.
Absolutely. And you made a good point. Like getting a coach and getting someone who knows how to interpret the, movements would accelerate even more, right? You would accelerate your movement even more. So I'm not saying, just do it yourself and completely guess what the sprinters are doing, because it does take a trained eye to break down slow motion. But I think almost anybody could benefit from starting to do it themselves and getting a practice of analyzing your own motions. Okay. After a while, you'll get good at it, no matter if you have no experience in it at all, right? You'll still be able to pick up on certain patterns. And, if you got a coach, it would accelerate it even more.
Yeah. And that's why, like, for anyone who's like trying to learn these go-to principles, for example, the best way to do it is to hire a go-to coach, because it's very, very easy to do it wrong, right? Like, it's like if you're not working with someone who has a trained eye or like a discerning eye, then it's very, very easy to kind of fall into this pattern of like, oh, I'm going to do this, but you're not watching yourself. You're not seeing the mistakes that you're making. Even if you film yourself, sometimes another person's eye who spends their life, by the way, like the reason that like hiring a coach is more beneficial is because they literally spend all their time thinking about and looking at and refining these ideas over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Did you want to get into anything else in terms of, maybe the Instagram beefs, or we'll do something a little bit more entertaining, more light?
Yeah. So that would be, I'd love to do like an Instagram beef of the day kind of situation.
Yeah.
I know you had one that was in mind. What's the name of you were talking about? It's
IKN.
Neuro.
Yeah, okay. I'm not so sure what IKN stands for. Integrated something neuro. But anyway, they were arguing with someone from GOTA. I can't remember who it was. And basically, do you have it up here so we can?
Yeah, I'm gonna open it up right now. So it's integrated kinetic neurology.
Okay.
We'll start
Yeah,
sharing.
open it up and put it on screen, and we'll talk about it and see what the comments are, and maybe bounce off ideas from there.
So integrated
Okay.
kinetic. Can you see my? You can see my screen now, eh?
Yeah, I can. And I just wanted to say that basically, the argument here is that Christian Coleman, he's one of the best sprinters in the world, has his foot turned out as he's running. Okay. He's going straight, but his foot is pointing clearly 45 degrees or maybe even slightly more off to the side. Okay. Goda always says, keep the feet straight, ankle bones high, feet straight. Okay. Or second toe straight. Christian Coleman, one of the best sprinters, clearly has it in a 45-degree angle. So what is happening here? IKN says he's probably trying to access his first metatarsal first, like his big toe, because that's where you drive power. Okay, so their argument is his foot's pointed out 45 degrees. These strategies are not quote unquote dysfunctional. These strategies need to be appreciated within the context of what movement, task, and environment demands. So basically, he's saying that, let's see, he says, quote unquote, the first metacarpal phalangeal joint, which is your big toe, is the ultimate endpoint of the lower limb. Okay, so he's making an assertion there that for sure that the endpoint is the under the big toe. Now, to me, looking at the, like, you sure you're supposed to be pushing power off those two small sesamoid bones, your whole force? Are you sure about that? Probably not. But anyway, the first metatarsal phalangeal joint is the ultimate endpoint of the lower limb. And here you can see that the external rotation of the femur and tibia, so the leg, what we view as freezing strategy based on someone's work, to help distribute load into the first metatarsal phalangeal joint fast. So basically, turn your foot out so that you can hit the big toe first, and you'll be faster that way. Okay, that's the argument. Now, the argument may have some merit. Like, if you actually believe that pushing off the big toe is the way to go and it's a linear model, then that may be correct in your mind. However, if you believe in the pivot point model and you want inside ankle bone high and foot straight, it makes more sense to have the foot land straight. And if you don't think that pushing off the big toe is actually what you're supposed to do, which none of the Goda guys think this. They actually, it's the antithesis. They think it's a pivot point more off the fourth and fifth metatarsal. You don't even want to hit the first metatarsal. So in principle, these guys will never agree, okay? Because if Goda's correct, then IKN is completely incorrect. And if IKN is correct and you're supposed to have your foot turned out to access that first metatarsal joint, which I think this is a ridiculous assertion, is that then they're correct, right? Then it's not a pivot point system, and you want to get to that big toe as soon as possible. So I think Christian Coleman should probably turn his leg out way more so he can access that big toe much faster. If he turns it out 90 degrees, he'll be there right away, and he'll be good to go. Or maybe there's an error here, and he can be even better. And that's what Goda would insert, right? It's like, this has nothing to do with the big toe. He's just maybe, tight. That's the way he's used to running, and he can improve it. So Goda's argument here would be that you can improve this obviously already gifted human being who is way outlier, okay? That's what they would say. Pivot point system, not even landing on the first metatarsal, and we can improve this guy.
And the reason that you wouldn't want to necessarily land on the first metatarsal, we kind of talked about the rotation of the upper and lower limbs of the leg, right? When your ankle bone drops and you externally rotate like this, you have a rotation of the lower limb going one way and the upper limb going the other way, right? And that sort of causes like tissue wear and tear in the knee and ankle joint, especially. This is the pattern. Like basically the thing that Goda observed isn't just the patterns of the best movers in the world, the Godas, like the greatest of all time athletes. They also noticed Wodas, which is the worst of all time athletes. So they watched a lot of film of people, in real time having these major catastrophic injuries, and they all noticed this exact pattern. His ankle drops, his foot is turned out. It's sort of, you have this counter rotation of the upper and lower limb, which is what causes that sort of pulling on the tissues of the knee and the ankle. And so when ICANN is saying, some may look at this and say it's dysfunctional, but this is one of the fastest people in the world right now. It's like, yeah, you might be one of the fastest people in the world right now, but that doesn't mean that his patterns are completely and totally safe for not causing wear and tear, right? Like he can be.
Sorry,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I really don't like that argument, like, because and almost everybody uses this one where it's like, this
it's an appeal to authority
person in the world. Well, it's that, and like, he's one of the fastest people in the world, so it's not dysfunctional. It's like, you could have movement that's not optimal and that may hurt you even if you're the fastest person in the world. And in fact, a lot of these guys are just genetic beasts. You know what I mean? Like, this person, despite what anybody would do to him, you could make him slower and he'll still be one of the fastest people on the planet, right? So a lot of guys with the strength and conditioning stuff, they'll attach themselves onto an athlete. I'm calling this out right now. They'll attach themselves onto an athlete, and when the athlete is successful, that's when your merit goes higher. But when the athlete is unsuccessful, does the same thing apply, right? So like, the argument of like, he's the best guy in the world right now, or one of the fastest, so it's not dysfunctional. And that whole argument just goes, because can he improve is really what the question is, not is he dysfunctional, right? So is it better to have your foot straight versus foot out in terms of injury prevention? Now, people would argue this too. People don't even I don't think IKN, or I'm pretty sure I saw Functional Patterns say this, the bow doesn't exist, okay? Or like, there was no such thing as a bow. Like, I don't see any of these guys really acknowledging the bow. It's massive. The bow is almost everything. It's your landing position, right? Like, let's debate the bow and not pretend it's not there, right? Like, he's clearly in a bow right now. So we can argue the nuances of it, but the bow exists, right? Like, let's recall it something else. Instead of the bow, we'll call it landing. Instead of the corner, let's call it leaving. So when your foot lands and when your foot leaves, what does your body look like? What is it supposed to look like? Is there actually a optimal way to do it? Not, is he dysfunctional or not? That makes no sense.
It's funny because I think definitely not a universal strategy. I wanted to just come back. There was this one question. Do all sprinters do this? Did Usain Bolt, or is this athlete's body mechanics anatomy? It's a very poorly worded, like there's not really good wording, and maybe it's an English as a second language. Yeah, but like, what they're saying is it's not a universal strategy across all sprinters. Some distribute load through the first MTP while keeping the femur and tibia closer to the sagittal plane, and some external rotation to achieve this. So how the athlete organizes their proximal segments will fluctuate, but the capacity to distribute that load into the first metatarsal phalangeal joint will be a stable feature.
They need that first metatarsal phalangeal joint badly.
Yeah. So it's interesting because they have contradictory assertions. I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to find the comment that they had. Here it is. Yeah. So they both assert there's definitely a need to appreciate the complexity of our system more and understand how there is no one perfect way to organize our movement, right? So on one hand, they're saying there's no perfect way to organize our movement, right? That's a strong assertion. It's like there is no right way. There is no right way. There's no perfect way. But on the other hand, the first metatarsal phalangeal joint is the ultimate endpoint, right? Which is suggesting that there's a perfect way to move, which is to have that metatarsal phalangeal joint be the endpoint of your stride. So go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just saying it's a contradiction of concepts, right? It's like either you have a proper way to move and organize your movement, or you don't, right? And they're like, they can't say that there is no perfect way to organize your movement and then make a universal assertion that's saying that that metatarsal phalangeal joint is the ultimate endpoint of lower limb movement.
Well, I think he is going after Goda here on purpose. Okay, a lot of these guys, yeah. Well, a lot of these guys don't admit it when they're called out. They're like, no, I was just saying. It's like, no. You were going after the assertions that Goda's making here, because if there is a perfect way or a universal way or a mathematical way, or let's say a natural way to land and leave, according to, Goda would say, babies do it, indigenous who haven't been touched by Western culture, old, sprint triathletes that are like really old. Anyway, they would say that there is a perfect way to move, and it doesn't include the first metatarsal phalangeal joint, the big toe, as a staple. You don't have to go there. It's for balance. You can go there, but you're going to be pivoting before you get there, and your energy is going to explode before you get to that first metatarsal phalangeal joint. I think Goda is correct about this. So yeah, I see the kind of, hypocrisy on that post that, my way is the right way, but there's no perfect way to move. Yeah. And there's, you know what, we're not going to agree on this, because what is your level of evidence here? Because there's not going to be evidence in Goda's favor, because in order to do studies about pivot point systems, you have to have models of pivot point systems first. It has to be popular. It has to be something that people understand. And at this point, people don't understand it. The only way to actually show it is on slow motion. So you can see it over and over and over again on slow motion. So there's something there, but I feel like a lot of these guys don't even want to have the discussion. They do your way is not right, but my way is right. And
yeah. Your way's not right because there is no perfect way, but also this is the best way.
Yeah. And where are your good movers at? Like when I see WEC method movers, beautiful.
Right,
when I see functional patterns,
he's the fastest person.
Yeah. It's okay. So like, what person is using IKN strategies and has beautiful movement from the IKN strategies? Okay. I want to see one. What they'll do is they'll work with good athletes and be like, oh, look at what we did. Where Goda actually has athletes that do their system that look like great, efficient, beautiful movers. That's the thing.
I think that the challenge here too is we look at Goda patterns and we see the spiral and we see the efficiency of the transfer of energy, and it's recognizable to us as good movement, right? So when you say show me the good movers, I'm almost cautioned to say it's like, we're defining good movers as people who have Goda patterns first and foremost, right? So when you have these people who are, and just hear me out on this for a second, right? Like we need, I think what Goda does well is defining the standard for good movement, where everyone else is saying it doesn't really matter. Look at the performance. I think of, have you ever read a Sam Harris book? You know Sam Harris?
Yeah, in the past, yes.
Yeah, so Sam Harris, the only book by Sam Harris that I think I haven't read yet is a book called The Moral Landscape, but I've heard him talk about it. And the moral landscape is this argument for, how you can use the scientific method or scientific mindedness to, establish morality without religion. And in that book, he proposes that you can basically imagine the best possible reality where there is no suffering and only good, and the worst possible reality where there is, nothing but suffering and terror, right? And basically the moral landscape is to try and get to that best possible good, and you use that sort of as a reference point, right? Now when we're talking about movement, the reason that's relevant, right? I'm talking about how can you have morality without religion? How's that relevant to movement? The model that he's using I find is interesting, which is to say, if we can imagine when we're determining what is the best possible movement, right? Can you determine, quality of movement? You can think of on one end, when we're making this determination, on one end of the spectrum, the good end of the spectrum, good movement would be the most efficient movement that causes the least amount of tissue degradation and the most amount of longevity and performance over years to come. The worst possible movements would be the most jarring on the system, cause the most wear and tear, pain, degradation, and dysfunction, essentially. So if you're using those two as models for the best and worst, right? You're thinking on a spectrum. I'm a really, really big fan of spectral thinking, as in you think in terms of things like moving towards something or moving away from something. This is when I look at this picture, he might be the fastest guy on the world, in one of the fastest guys in the world. He's got the quads to prove it, but he's moving away from the best possible movement because the movements that he is producing are causing tissue damage, are similar to the patterns which cause tissue damage over time that have been observed in every possible injury, right? So this is why Goda and Woda, when they're talking about Goda and Woda, these are two ends of the spectrum. These are two ideas where it's like you're either moving towards these efficient movement patterns that cause less tissue damage, or you're moving towards bad movement patterns that cause tissue damage. Which one are you moving towards? So that was just something, when you say something
beautifully. Yeah.
And that's why I get frustrated when it says like there's no perfect way to organize our movement. Well, like let's at least come up with principles that we can move towards that are better. Yeah, like it doesn't have to be perfect, but there are better and worse, even if there is no perfect, right? Because perfect, movement doesn't exist in a vacuum, and there might not be a perfect way, but there are principles that are better and worse, and that will cause more or less tissue damage. And so I think that was,
Would you use sprinters as the best movers? I wouldn't. I say they move like, I know that's the cultural, the 100-meter sprinter is the fastest guy on the world, and we're all watching them. Like all the people who watch movement watch sprinters, right? So there is a lot to be learned there. Don't get me wrong. But if I want movement efficiency for the rest of my life, I'm not going to copy a sprinter. Okay. And that's an assertion that like I see almost everybody making. Pick an athlete and just be like, this athlete does this, so this is the way it should be done. No, not necessarily. We can learn a lot from them, but that's not necessarily true. Now, if I was to pick an athlete that I would model around, it would be more like a smooth martial artist who could also run really efficiently. Okay. So like a running back style runner, a little bit less power. Okay. Because, playing sports isn't like, this is going to be a little bit of a tangent. Athletes and sports are not real life. They're hyper specialized in the vast majority of cases to do only what they do very, 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 very well. Okay. They're not who I model long-term movement around. And this is like a mistake because it's very easy to shine a spotlight on an athlete. And even I've probably done it in the past and just be like, this is who I want to model my movement around. I do it with Michael Jordan, to be honest, because I think he has the smoothest movement possible, right? Like I like the way he walks. I want to model that. But in terms of just taking an athlete and not breaking down the actual part by part motion of why they move smoothly and just be like, you know what? There's no bow. There's no corner. I think he sticks his foot out here because he's trying to access his first metatarsal. You can't prove that. And just like Goda can't prove that, that I guess 45 degrees from your knee internally and externally rotates 45 degrees. I don't know if you can prove that the way that, society proves things through research. Okay. So like there's a lot of assertions being done on every end of the spectrum on how to move properly. My assertion is that Goda has it correct, that there is a correct way to move. This isn't relative. There is a correct way to move. Okay. So this is all very interesting stuff. I love it.
And you know what? Like I love the idea of like there is a perfect way to organize your movement. I think Goda is the most correct, right? And I'm reluctant to say that they're fully correct. I think their principles are really spot on, and they're observing things that are really, really important and powerful, right?
I should say the most correct by far from what I've seen so far. There's always improvement to be done, always things to be seen, but I think they have found a very nice chunk portion of how to model movement for longevity, performance, what's it called? Like efficiency. All that can be done with an easy base that Goda provides. And now like I'm proving it to myself by doing it with my patients as rehab. It's simplified things, made it a lot easier. I'm seeing results, and it's beautiful simplicity. Okay. Yeah. Using gait mechanics to move. One more tangent. I forgot when we were talking about slow motion. Yes, everybody uses slow motion, and I see this argument being used over and over again. When Goda says, look at the slow motion, and like a weightlifter would go, well, we use slow motion. Everybody uses slow motion. I saw that with the Zach Tellender debate with Ricky Stanzi. Yeah. It's like, no, you don't use slow motion. You use slow motion to analyze lifting, but you're not using slow motion to analyze the movement across many spectrums and commonalities. So if you're looking for that, if you're looking for movement and commonalities amongst the best movers, that is what you're going to find. If you're not looking for that, if you're only looking for how to lift weights, that's what you're going to find. So it's a straw man argument to say that everybody looks at slow motion. No, they don't. I'd say most people don't look at slow motion. And if they do, from my experience, because I've looked at so many different analysis of gait, it's all side view analysis where you can't see that much.
Right. Yeah.
I shouldn't say all. I'm 95% side view analysis.
And even if it's like, or a front on analysis, for example, it's like there's a 3-dimensional component and that spiraling movement that GOTA looks at. You can't just look at a side view analysis and talk about what's happening at the hip and the knee and the ankle in the same way, right? Like, because you're thinking now in 3 dimensions. There's a lot that you said there that was very, very. I kind of, you told me once that it's like, oh man, when you go on these tangents, I have a hard time replying because there's like 40 things that I want to bring up, and then I forget all of them. I literally forgot everything that I was going to say.
It's all good. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. What I was saying is like, this was the point that I wanted to make, was what you just said is like, it's not that everyone doesn't use slow motion, right? Like, it's like, I think a lot of people do use slow motion, but it's like, what are you using slow motion for? What are you actually analyzing? And what I love about what GOTA did is they looked at not just athletes. They looked at people who can move well into their old age. They looked at, they looked at 2 ends of the spectrum of human existence. They looked at how are babies moving right out of the womb instinctually without any influence from their parents or trying to mimic the movements of others. And then how are indigenous cultures that have never worn shoes or sat in chairs or done any of this shit, how are they moving? And here's this person who's 100 years old and still running, little races, and they're still, doing long distance runs. What are their hips, ankles, and feet doing? Why don't they have knee joint problems at their age? They're looking at all of this stuff. And when you say, it's like, how would you pick the best mover? It's like, well, probably a sprinter wouldn't be the best, because a sprinter's career, the mileage may vary, right? When you're looking at like, how are you going to move well for the entirety of your existence all the way into old age? Well, that's a bit of a different question, right? And I think that's it's a worthy question to answer. There was one thing that just came to my mind, one differentiation, because we talked about ATG a little bit ago. We talked about GOTA quite a bit, and I think there's 2. We had a great, I think, productive conversation with Keegan Smith, and I thought about this a lot. GOTA is a system of movement specifically. It's a system of movement principles, and ATG is a system of training principles, right? So it's not necessarily that ATG has its own integrated movement principles ingrained in it. Ben Patrick, knees over toes guy, does have it because he has his knees over toes system, which is specifically tissue conditioning for people with knee problems. And that, and he trains athletes too, and he does, a lot of basketball players are really fond of him. A lot of different athletes, like football players and stuff, they're doing his stuff because the tissue conditioning is making their linear, non-efficient movements easier to withstand, right? So, but they're first and foremost, one of the points that Keegan made just today, actually, he was talking about it. Like, look, ATG is just a system of principles. We have in the ATG for coaches system, there are Olympic lifters, there are CrossFitters, there are power lifters, there are, like track athletes, there are all kinds of people who are just taking the training principles and applying it to their particular sport. And that's where it's like, okay, cool, because I love the ATG principles. I love the results that I got from the ATG principles. I think they're valid and sound. I think the results that they get are speaking for themselves. And if they can get the types of results that they're getting using a non-linear movement model, a linear movement model, then what kind of results could they get if you were applying them in an athletic context to a movement practice that has that spiral and the GOTA principles?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question, right? Like how much, because there is gold in ATG. And I think that's like, it's how they parsed out, like I said before, how they parsed out short and long range movements. I think the blood flow, getting blood flow into areas using simple training techniques like the sleds. When I saw them drag sleds backwards at first, I was like, okay, just next, right? But I like the idea of getting blood flow within muscles without damaging them. That's huge, right? Now, I would personally say that most people don't have the sound biomechanics. Like,
No.
just from natural, like you sit in school, that messes, every single person has done this. It messes things up. We're in shoes. Like, none of this is natural, okay? And yes, I do believe that if you keep going with natural motions, you're not sitting all day, then your body does get better. If you didn't have furniture, your body would be much better off. But we're now used to this. So I think that building tissue quality intelligently, it's great. But I think most people could value or get more value out of learning good biomechanical principles like that come out of GOTA, WEC method, summon functional patterns like tensegrity, right? Versus focusing much more on the tissue, right? The tissue quality. Now, it's up to us kind of to experiment both. There's not a lot of people who are willing to do both, right? So it's interesting. I want to integrate a little bit of ATG into the go-to work that I do and see what I can do from there, right? I just want to make sure that I apply all the principles of GOTA when I'm doing ATG. I still want to keep in mind of that spinal engine, that smooth back and forth motion. Even with Christian Coleman's video that you had up before, his head was over his foot. Okay.
Yeah.
He's like, and I have a feeling that that's going to be admitted soon amongst it. I don't think that's a consensus yet amongst professionals, but I think within a year or two, people are going to be like, oh yeah, we always wanted side bend. Of course, head over foot, right? But really, it wasn't like that, and it is still not like that, right? Like, I bet you, I don't know what most people would say to that. Like, I know that David Weck was on Knees Over Toes YouTube channel, showing him the head over foot method and how to be smooth with the upper body and the figure eights. But I never see it in the training that Ben Patrick does. I never see the spinal motion I've never seen it one time. So maybe he's doing it outside of camera, and maybe he's like, oh, I play enough sports that, I can parse it out.
Well, the thing about Ben, the thing that I do like about Ben is that, a lot of his training for, like, he does a lot of long range training for the hips and the legs and stuff, but he also trains a lot of spinal flexion, extension, and side bending, right? So he actually has, if he believes in strengthening that core area, but he does it in a way where the range is maintained. Like, he doesn't want it like fully stiff necessarily. It's not like a huge brace the core, create rigidity. He's like, you need to have movement here. Right now, the way he does it is interesting because it's all, like, let's create range and strength within that range with the side bend, with Jefferson curls, and like make it so that you have this range and the freedom. But he doesn't train or like for Ben Patrick, his system is around tissue conditioning first and foremost, and last, like that's the end all be all, right? And like with Weck, for example, seeing Ben Patrick, I didn't actually watch the video on YouTube, full disclosure, but when you're watching, it's funny because you're seeing Weck do some of these ATG squats that you would normally do on a slant board, but he's doing them on the Bosu ball, right? Because David Weck invented the Bosu ball, so he's doing these ATG squats and these split squats and everything. He's doing them on the Bosu ball. But I find it interesting for David Weck to do this. I think some of the ideas integrate really well, because if you have this tendinal thickness, you can improve the elasticity. That's my own, I'm just, I don't have anything to prove that. That's just an assertion that I'm making based on observations that I actually made powerlifting, right? I think I talked about that in a previous episode where I had a coach recommend that I do slower eccentrics to increase tendinal thickness so that I had more elasticity out of the hole to lift more weight. That applied to different parts where it's like, okay, so if I can increase tendinal thickness, then I can increase, and I train for elasticity, then I can have better elasticity and better rebound in my movement. Now, is that true? I don't know. I'm still testing it, but I think there's stuff to explore there. And again, like, just not throwing away something because it doesn't agree with like the totality of principles, really, really important, I find.
And I think that, you know, acknowledging that the spine is not just a stiff unit is the first step. But in reality, you have to, like, in order to prove your biomechanics and how you actually move, the spinal engine has to be smooth transfer. Your head has to be over your foot as you're stepping. This takes a lot of head control, takes a lot of body control. This isn't just holding a range and getting to the farthest range possible. In fact, if you could bend all the way over to your side like a yogi, that's not going to help you in the spinal engine. Okay, so at some point, it has to transfer into the spinal engine. Also, with tendons, the strongest tendons belong to Olympic lifters and power lifters. Okay, so at some point, that argument ends. That let's say you have a power lifter who has the best range of motion possible, who can do the splits and, you know, can put their head or legs behind their ears. At some point, that must transfer into a boat and corner motion. Okay, so I do understand that there is a certain range that you have to have your tendons and your connective tissue strong enough to withstand the forces that you're putting on them. Okay, and that is what you need to do. Most athletes, most non-athletes, and that's 99.99999% of the population, do not need that next 10% explosive power on, or like strength on the tendons. And to get that next level, that next 20%, 10-20%, you need to devote a lot of time and effort into that.
Yeah.
So where is your time best spent? If you're an athlete, perhaps it is doing range of motion work like Ben and Keegan do. But I think for the vast majority of the population, they're not there and they're not using large ranges of motion. No one needs to do the splits unless you're a dancer or, into martial arts. The ranges of motion that you need are very, very minuscule in most circumstances. Like, that's not to say that you should be a stiff board. I'm not saying that, but you don't need to do the splits either, right? So one more thing is that with tendon strength, I think right off the get-go, when you do it, you do get, I think there is value in strengthening your tendons like ATG does, even doing only like a small amount of it, like a couple months, because it will stop you from shutting down your nervous system when you're going to do something powerful. Okay. So there is an aspect of, because I'm focusing on my tendons and on my connective tissue so much, I'm putting them through the range. My brain is connecting to that part of my body so much that when I'm doing something powerful, I'm probably not going to get injured. Right. But is it the most efficient use of your time and energy? My argument again is that no, I would do go to first and then integrate ATG principles someplace after that. But again, it's up for debate. Who knows, right? Like, we're thinking about this first, really.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of this year, when we're talking about what are our personal goals, we started this episode with that. My personal goals are to explore this a lot, right? It's like, I know you're going to be focusing more on the movement side of things, and I'm going to be really focused on a lot of the strength training application side of working within these patterns, right? So it's kind of cool. We're going to have two different approaches and two different sets of results to sort of report as we move along, right? I'm not necessarily trying to get the splits this year. I am definitely trying to work on some range of motion and unbinding some stuff from excessive weight training still. Like, I still have lats and traps that are way too bound up from excessive lifting, like lifting in excess, right? And I still have some hip problems and some ankle dorsiflexion issues that stop me from accessing comfortable resting postures. When we're talking about like flexibility, for example, you're like, like not everyone needs to go in the splits. Some things that I think that everybody should be able to do are rest on the floor comfortably for periods at a time, not for hours at a time, right? Because the body's not meant to just sit in the same place for hours. But like, you should be able to like be in a resting squat, or be in the seiza position, or be able to just be on the floor comfortably without your joints feeling like they're going to explode, or your system feeling like it's like super, super tense.
So I can't do a resting squat without having my ankles up high, but it literally is like, I just adapt to that and that's fine. I can stay down there for hours, right? Like, I have metal in one of the ankles, so it's never going to get there, right? Like, it's just actually physically blocked. So I can, get into cowboy position where one foot's on the ground and then the other leg is, behind you like there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's many different resting positions. It doesn't have to be the squat. And since it's a resting position, you can see from most countries that have people who squat all the time, like in Eastern Europe and in Asia, it's a cultural thing. You just squat and talk to your buddies, you know? So like if you watch them, not a lot of them have a perfect squat to sit down. A lot of them get stacked injuries. A lot of them just used to having their feet out. So with that, it's like, it doesn't have to be a perfect squat, but the squat is a natural resting position. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, would I say try to be in the best squat position possible as you're getting down there? Absolutely. But if you don't have that, still get into the squat. Okay.
Yeah,
because
of course.
And do what you can to get down on the floor to rest. Down on the floor to rest versus your chair is going to do more for you. Again, this is controversial than doing a bodybuilding style workout for a month. If you change your behavior to learn how to sit on the floor and rest your body will physiologically be better off after a month because you've changed your behavior. You're going to have a skill for life versus just pumping your muscles up for a month.
Yeah.
Now, and again, I'm not saying do one or the other, but I'm just saying that was a controversial point that I want to just throw out there. Right?
Yeah, because that's what we're all about.
Yeah.
This is the art of move. We can't get away with not having at least 5 controversial statements per episode. Minimum.
Yes.
On that note, we've been this is a longer episode, but it is the first episode of 2022, and we wanted it to kind of flow. I feel like we didn't really lose a stride there between our little Christmas New Year break. But for those who are listening, guys, we do these episodes live on nofilter.net, a live streaming platform that is also interactive. So if you're watching live, you can ask us questions in the chat. You can hit the knock button and join us and actually have conversations with us. We're still waiting for our first audience member to come join us and debate us on any of the topics that we're talking about. Coming up next, we're probably going to do another episode this week, as well as, many, many, many more. I wouldn't be surprised if we do over 100 episodes this year alone. For example, Stephen Luker in the audience today. Questions are key. Stephen, I'm still waiting for a question from you. But Stephen is also a No Filter host. And what I really loved about Stephen was seeing him go from an audience member who was joining the streams of the people that he was watching, and then loving it so much that he became a host himself, right? So if you love, the interactivity element and you want to have these community discussions, that's why we're hosting it on No Filter. So if you're a listener, and we know there are listeners because we have over 1,000 listens now across different platforms. We know you guys are listening and we want to meet you. We want to see the faces of people. So go check out nofilter.net. You can see our next upcoming episodes. If you guys have any questions or things that you want us to cover, any Instagram beef that you thought was interesting, we're going to be doing at least an Instagram beef of the day. There's a few that I want to kind of dig into that I found are really funny. And yeah, we'll
some of them are great.
Oh my God, we should fully have we'll have an Instagram beef episode coming up in the next week or two. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening to The Art of Move. This is episode 22, first episode of 2022. We hope you have an amazing year with us. We're looking forward to growing and sharing more of our info and some of the results that we have. Thanks again for listening, guys. We'll catch you next time.
Have a good one, guys. And I just wanted to say one thing. Spirals exist, bows exist, and have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
There we go.